All right, we're very lucky to have Jing today from Stanford. She's been doing a lot of work on memorization for a few years now, a memorization expert at this point. And she had a recent paper, I guess, in collaboration with Good Fire AI.
Really just active.
Okay. And this is about like understanding why larger models end up learning more. We've had some discussions about it, but we're also like really eager to learn from you and ask you questions. In general, we keep this session a little interactive, so if people have questions,
Yeah,
if you
feel
don't
free
mind.
to.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thanks for the intro. As Pratish said, I usually work on memorization, and judging by the title, this looked like the opposite of memorization. And I think this is one of the cool things I realized through this research is like, well, actually, you know what? Memorization can lead to a lot of good things. And hopefully through the talk, you'll start seeing how it actually connects to memorization, but also like how it connects to more general like learning. All right, so this is the paper that we released, I think, about a month ago, called Why Larger Models Learn More, Effects of Capacity, Interference, and Real Task Retention. So let me first start with how we get here. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. If you look at, I guess, the machine learning research, especially large language model research in the past 5 or 10 years, here is probably one of the simplest and also most universal, and also probably most impactful findings people have, which is, it turns out you can just increase the performance of pretty much any task by increasing your model size. And if we summarize all these plots, in one plot, that's what it looks like. You increase your model parameters, and your accuracy just somewhat go up. And it turns out it's even better, right? Because it's just not just like any random curve or any random relation. It turns out that we have a pretty nice curve in the sense if you take log scale on both x and y axis, we actually got a straight line. And we can actually express it precisely using this mathematical formula, which I will dive more into the next slide. So here we have the test loss. So this is the thing we want to minimize. And this L0 is what I call the irreducible loss. So this is just like whatever not compressible in your data. And here we have n, which is the number of parameters. And as you can tell from this equation, once you increase this n, you're going to get a smaller test loss. We also have d, which is roughly, you can think about something that describes the amount of data you have, and typically this is number of tokens. And this alpha and the beta are simply what we call the scaling exponents. So these describe how fast your loss will be reduced once you increase the number of parameters or number of tokens. We also have a and b. These are constants. So it's just like when you fit to a data set, you will have specific a and b value. Okay, so this is just like parallel scaling in a nutshell. So the interesting question here is, what does this parallel scaling say about the loss gap between a smaller and larger model? We know when we increase this number of n, we're going to get a smaller loss, but what's the nature of this gap that we get? So this is where things get interesting. So let's plot out that function in this graph. So on the x-axis, we have number of parameters. So let's say we have a small model that we call NS and a larger model with size NL. And we can see as we scale up the parameter size, we have a gap in the loss. That's what we mark there. And the question is, what is the nature of this gap, right? Is it just like larger model are more simple, efficient? Hence, for smaller models, it just haven't get there yet. So this is where we bring out this orange curve. And what this orange curve does is basically saying, well, let's just give both model infinite compute. So this is like both model train on infinite data. So if this is just a simple efficiency issue, what we should see is once we give them infinite compute, the smaller model should eventually catch up with the larger model. Because, if all scaling does is to make things learn faster. And as you can see here, this doesn't seem to be the case. And the reason we can say it doesn't seem to be the case is exactly because we have that formula. So everything can be analyzed analytically. And we can see that there are actually two parts. So the first part is what we call things can be learned through data scaling. So if you store more data, this is the part where the sample efficiency eventually catch up, and the smaller model can get closer to the larger model. However, what's more interesting, which is what we're going to look into in this talk, is this little part. What this says is, if you're just scaling the data, the smaller model cannot catch up with the larger model. There's a gap. And this gap pretty much requires you to scale up model size. That's the only way to bring a smaller model match a larger model. Okay, this is interesting. And now the question is, what is in this gap, right? And, is the answer to our previous question? No. The smaller model fails to learn part of the data mixture that the larger model succeeded on, even, enter infinite data. So what's the nature of this gap? As people have worked on memorization, one of the natural guess you would have is it just like, the memorized information? Because if you look at the literature of memorization, you will see a very similar scaling law. As you scale up model size, you also get more and more memorization. This is the paper from DeepMind, I believe. And even better, there's a more recent work, which is really cool, where people basically correlate how much these kind of irreducible knowledge a model can store with the model size very well. So one relatively naive hypothesis is, is that little gap just pretty much whatever model memorized about a long tail information? And here memorization, which specifically means about memorizing individual training instances. Well, the quick answer here is that's probably not it. Why that's the case? Because if you remember from the curve, this is already under infinite compute, basically infinite data. It's unlikely, memorization alone, which are all about individual examples, can explain this, difference in the loss. This is a huge difference. This has to be something that's basically represent the data distribution, such that any data that you sample from the distribution will have a difference between a smaller and larger model. So this is a very important concept here. So we're not just talking about individual examples here. We're talking about some kind of distribution, which will get clearer and clearer later in the talk, that's causing this difference.
I have a question, which might be a digression, but does the irreducible loss also depend on the data itself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking if someone's training on synthetic data, they can probably learn a different loss.
Right.
Like a lower loss, just because of the data distribution being entirely different.
Yes, that is definitely true.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt. Okay, so this is basically our observation from the scaling law, right? So we see larger model can learn a part of the task distribution the smaller model failed to learn. And I already said this has nothing to do. This can't be purely explained by data efficiency. This also can't purely explained by just memorization of individual instance. And the remaining question is, so what tasks are actually in this task distribution that only learn by larger models? And the second question is, what kind of magic does those larger model have that allow them to actually learn this part of distribution? So I'll go over these two questions one by one in the slides follows. Okay, so we'll start from the first one. What tasks are only learned by larger models? So the nice thing about scaling law is it doesn't just apply to large language model. It actually applies to very simple linear regression model. And this actually gives us a lot of powerful tools to analyze what's going on. So I'm going to start with a very simple linear regression tasks and to help us build some intuition of what's going on here. So let's first describe what kind of data we have. We have a mixture of linear regression tasks. They just look very simple. And each task have some features. So here we can imagine we draw the x from a Gaussian distribution centered at 0 and with some covariance. And in particular, the covariants are defined by pretty standard stuff, your feature matrix. And then the lambda terms are the, you can think about the spectrum of the features. So if you have, multiple eigenvalues, that pretty much means you have like multiple features you need for this task. So pretty standard setup. The other setup we want is, for two different tasks, we want a feature space to be orthogonal. This is just a simplification. Like we, for now, don't want to consider the interference or like between tasks or sharing between tasks. And we're also going to introduce this notion of frequency because we have a mixture. Not everything in the mixture occur in the same frequency, right? So let's just assume we sorted pretty much all the tasks by the frequency. And let's say the case task is somewhere in the middle. Okay. Any question at this point? This is just like pretty standard, mixture of linear regression task setup. Okay, so that's the data, and this is the model we're going to train on it. So notice a little bit different. Because we want to train on this mixture of data, we're going to normalize the input a little bit, the input and output. Other than that, it's pretty much just a very simple model. So we have, I guess, two sets of layers. The first one is a shared encoder shared between all tasks. And the weights of the encoder is shown there. It will be d dimension times n. And n is like the width of the encoder. And for decoder, we're going to have task-specific decoder. Otherwise, there's no way for us to learn like task-specific regression heads. And here we're going to predict the label, which, as I said, the input and output are normalized such that the input can be shared. Okay, so now it gives us a bunch of knobs we can tweak. So the one thing we're interested in most is obviously this encoder. That's also because the decoder actually has a closed form solution you can just basically write out by hand. So the encoder is controlled by this width n, and we basically want to see, as we tweak this number n, how does that affect which task get learned by the model and which task does not. And you can actually do this all analytically, but I'm just going to show you the actual experiment results. So this is like actual run, not just like analytical results. The dotted line are the analytical results, which you can ignore for now. So what do we see is, so this is what's called a phase diagram. So we vary this model width n, the encoder width n. We also vary I guess like the tasks we have. Tasks are already all there. And we see how model can learn these tasks. And the color here basically encoded the normalized loss. So 1 means the loss is high, and 0 means the loss is low. So what's really interesting is you see this really nice staircasing, right? So what that implies is as we increase the model width, we find out that these larger models start learning the more rare tasks. So as I said, the tasks are sorted by frequency.
One thing I just wanted to double check. I said the only difference between tasks is their frequency. You're not manipulating difficulty or complexity knob of some kind.
So we do in the paper. So this plot is on the frequency.
Okay.
We have another set of experiment in the appendix, which manipulates the complexity. And that's a really great question. I kind of glossed over. So that at lambda term actually control the complexity. So you can imagine a task that having a single feature would be simpler than a task that require 10 different features stored. Yeah. So yes, this is a setting where you can at least have multiple knobs to play with. And here, let's just for simplicity, just focus on frequency. It turns out the complexity one follows about the same trend. It's also larger model allow you to learn more complex things. Okay. So here, as I said, focus on frequency. And we can see that somehow, as we increase the width, we see these larger models start learning rare tasks. Okay, this is pretty cool. And as I said, the dotted line are basically analytical predictions that if you don't want to run the experiment, you can do some math to compute it out. Okay, so this is a synthetic setting. We kind of get some hints on, what's the difference. So does this hold in a more realistic pre-training setting? This is where things get a little bit complicated because we no longer have these very nice linear regression tasks we can analyze, but we have something else. So here,
I have a question. So in the previous part, the takeaway was only large model can learn rare tasks, right?
yes.
But is there anything we can learn about how large models learn frequent tasks regarding overfitting or memorization?
So
Frequent.
right. So here, I don't think we have the concept of overfitting as if, it's like the testing and training are drawn from the same distribution, which is defined above. Like each of these tasks just, draw from one of these distributions, right? So you see the frequent tasks just got learned nicely. Like basically you fit on it and that's it. There will be more interesting notion of that later in the pre-training models.
If you go previous slide, where you have no, the next one, yeah. So as you increase the n, the encoder is like getting
Wider.
wider
Yes.
and wider. But since you also have like closed form expression for decoder, I'm assuming there will be also a closed form expression for encoder. So what the thing that you end up learning with this gradient based approach, how far are the learned matrices from the actual matrix? I mean, because if you make things extremely wide, the matrix is like at that point could be rank deficient in some senses. So I'm just trying to understand, like in this toy setup, if you are actually learning the same correct closed form expression.
I believe the dotted line are computed using some closed form, so you can see how the dotted line are diverged from the actual like staircase boundaries.
Mhm.
I think that's what you're looking for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not too bad yet.
Okay.
At this n equal 256, I think it's like the widest one we tried.
Mhm.
Yeah. But you're totally right. Like the setup actually required a lot of tweaking, because exactly like this is running stochastic gradient descent. So you have to get the optimization part working.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You got these in the first training round.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's why like this synthetic setting is very nice. Like you have some kind of theoretical intuition there first, and then you can kind of tweak your training process
get to the
yes, to
dotted
get
line.
there. Yeah. And then that kind of encouraged saying, okay, there's actually something there. We can actually look into actual pre-training. Yeah. Okay, any more question here before I jump to the pre-training setup? Okay, so for pre-training setup, actually the very first question is already very tricky. Like for data, well, what is the task, right? What is the task in pre-training? This is actually very hard to define. And to make our life easy, we made this very important simplification, which I think is critical, which we basically consider task with some kind of abstract structure. And a very intuitive way you can think about it is these are things can be generated by a piece of algorithm. So you can think about this is one of the tasks we use, which is like modular, arithmetic, right? You add up two number, mod p. This is like something you could generate by like one line of Python, and this basically gives you a very well-defined data generation process. And this is your task. This task also in the literature has been used to study Grokking, if people have heard about that. Also used a lot of like mechanistic interpretability study to see like what feature it learns. So the other nice thing about this task is basically has a global feature that kind of corresponds to the abstract structure. So in order to represent this kind of modular structure, model actually needs to encode a set of Fourier features. This is just how transformer computes modular arithmetic. This actually helps some later analysis, which I won't go in detail, but you can check in the paper.
How do you define rare tasks? Is it like introduction to
rare task? Okay, I'll talk about that in the next slides. That's you're right. Like we can't say like absolutely like how rare it is, but it's just a relative comparison. Yeah. So this is just an example task that we use. And then they kind of get to the question you have, which is like, well, one way, which is the first approach that we kind of think of is, well, maybe we can just try to do some kind of data attribution to, go find all the instance of these tasks in the pre-training run. And then we can determine like, how frequent it is. Let's say maybe this task is less frequent than, let's say, comparing two numbers. And as you can imagine, this kind of, top-down approach quickly gets like untrackable because a task can come in so many forms. Even this modular arithmetic, like, a single space can basically lead to like different surface form of the same task, right? So because of that, it's very hard to like actually precisely tell like which instance is contributing to model learning this task and like what's the actual task frequency is. So what we did instead is we borrowed something from actually memorization literature. So one of the way, I guess the most of all control way people measure memorization and also forgetting is you basically insert an instance into pre-training run. And then you see after that point, how model behavior change based on the thing you inserted. So what we're going to do here is instead of like injecting these like individual instance, single instance, we're going to inject basically different instance of a task at a given frequency. So this gives us control over both how frequent we want this task and also like what exactly this task is. So the only caveat here is because we're injecting this kind of new task into a pre-training run, we want to, again, reduce the interference between whatever already in the pre-training run. Let's say pre-training run already have this task, and then you added more, this kind of make all the analysis hard to do again, right? So how we did it is we basically encode these new tasks in a very bizarre format that we guarantee the model will not see it in pre-training. So for example, for these modular arithmetic, we basically encoded in 3 tokens. So these are 3, these tokens are basically random samples from model vocab. So these are just normal English words. You can think about them like apples, pears, and orange. And here apple means 0, and pear mean 1, and orange, let's say, mean 2. And we just randomly sample a bunch of tokens, let them represent 0 to 100, and we encoded this modular arithmetic task in this. So it's very unlikely in pre-training the model going to see in a context where apple means 0. Hence, it's very unlikely the existing instance in your pre-training data are going to have any impact on this task. And this allows us to get a relatively clean learning curve of this task.
And P is constant.
P is constant. P is, I think in our experiment, we just use 100. Yeah, okay. So it's not encoded anywhere. Yeah.
And you had to do this process because you are taking a pre-trained model. Therefore, you have to have A as...
Because it's like we are using pre-training data and we have to, right? Like if you want to do a real pre-training run, you have to use some kind of existing pre-training data. We're not using actual pre-training model. And the reason we can't use actual pre-training model is pretty much here because it's very hard for you to, do this kind of post hoc analysis saying, oh, here's a task I want for pre-training. Let me go actually count it and find which instance actually contribute to this task.
Okay.
Just because a task can be in 100 different forms.
Curious, what are all the tokens? How much did you increase the token space at the start?
Oh,
is it only just 10 number, 10 or?
So I think we use the 0 to 100 for this particular task. It doesn't introduce any new token. As I said, we just randomly sample existing token from the vocab. And basically just override them with this mean for this particular task.
When you say apple, it's literally an apple token.
Yes.
Apple has 2 meanings.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And you see we encode it in a very compact way. So basically it's try to minimally disturb the actual pre-training.
Yeah. Is there any signifying token before this that says this is this task?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. It just we put it in the beginning.
Because I guess for the linear regression setting, you just have all the heads and then you sample the one that you're actually doing.
So this one is because it's we put it in the beginning, so it's very unlikely in any other context model you even see the ABVs to token happen, in the same sentence, right? It's
Yeah.
like random token.
Mhm.
So model actually get this pretty fast. It's like, once you see this, this task.
So in some ways, you're creating a family of trigrams that are sort of random compared to the actual natural
Right.
language, but that have an inherent structure to them. That
Yes,
is,
that's all I say. Yes. Any other questions? Those are all great questions. Okay, so this is what we get. So each of we basically conduct different runs, like by varying the frequency in which we inject these tasks. And we also like try different model size. So this is using the OMO pre-training pipeline. So using basically the OMO pre-training data. Here's what we get. So we see the training loss. This is all loss of this task. We see pretty much like a similar trend we saw before. Larger models, and also when the task gets more frequent, it has a smaller training loss. So what's more interesting, this connect back to the question you have earlier, which is like, what about overfitting and all that? As I said, this is a task that in the literature being used to study Grokking. And we actually see this very surprising effect that people haven't reported in the literature because no one has done Grokking in the pre-training run setting, that only larger models train off frequent when this task is frequent actually show Grokking behavior. Even though you can see like in the first training loss plot, all the top right this 9 cells have pretty low training loss. However, only these like probably 4 or 5 model actually grok in the sense that they also have a very high evaluation accuracy.
But are you saying grokking is just generalization?
Yes, generalization. Holdouts examples.
It's confusing because you're showing training loss on evaluation.
Yeah, just look at the color. That's the point of the color.
Yeah, I was confused for 1 minute and then I realized that it's
Yeah.
And in this particular case, every model is trained for the same token budget. Okay.
That is
Grokking-
sorry. I was just going to say that's a good caveat for observation because the other way is like you do the compute optimal training. That's another way to compare them. We have that result in the appendix. It doesn't change the story too much. Yeah.
What's your definition for same token bucket? Is it the same flops?
Literally like same number of like training tokens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the same steps, but not.
Yes, same steps. Yes. We also did the one for the compute budget, so flops. It's only changed things like slightly, but it doesn't affect the overall trends.
So in Grokking, is it something that people see that for the same training loss you get 2 different eval accuracies, or?
So I think the most general notion of Grokking is what they call like a delayed generalization.
Yeah.
So you would have, I guess you're right, basically 2 models that might look like they have the same training loss, and this training loss usually is like pretty close to 0. The Grok model are the ones that actually have a very high evaluation accuracy versus a non-Grok one, where you can just think about like the step right before Grok would be a model is a similar training loss, but then like very low evaluation accuracy. It's very, I think this one definitely like, there definitely can be more work done there because it would take us like a lot of effort to even produce this.
Yeah.
It's unclear, like, why this is the case, which is very interesting. Like, it fits the scaling picture very well, but then it's very counterintuitive. Why only when a model have more resources and learn this like Grokking solution?
One more question. So in this particular case, I mean, the eval is basically, if I were to look at the equation, the A, B, and P. P is constant, and A and B are the only thing that is changing. So how do you space out A and B such that you match the training and the validation distribution?
You just do random split.
Okay, so you have like some max cap till which you have A and B and just like randomly shuffle and take it so that like they're kind of at least interleaved and not completely separate.
Yeah, you just random split.
So is this like this aligns very closely with the double descent phenomenon,
Yes.
right? Where you pass the interpolation threshold, and now a model that achieves essentially 0 training error is going to start looking for things that have minimum norm or otherwise like are more compact, and that more compact then generalizes.
Right. But it's very interesting there because like one argument people have for these kind of Grok model is they actually learned simpler solution, right? So solution that actually take less neuron to represent. That's one way people think about these Fourier features. But it's kind of like counterintuitive here in the sense that, but then why like those smaller model who apparently have more resource constraint doesn't get pushed to discover these solutions? And the larger model, who apparently have a lot of neurons to spare and can afford memorizing everything, somehow discovered these very compact representation. Hence, they got the Grokking solution, right? Yeah, I think there's like a lot of follow-up work need to be done here to fully explain this.
Looking at the square on the left, looks like if you're going with increasing task frequency, even the 20M model does get very close
Yes.
in terms of the training loss.
Yes.
Do you know what happens if you slightly increase the task frequency? Does the small model also now end up getting good eval accuracy?
I believe so. I think if you keep going, the smaller model eventually will Grok. Yeah. Because even the smaller model is like, you can think of the most extreme form, right? Like if you just only train on this task, even the smaller model used here is already 20 million. It's like way overkill for this task. And we actually have this, I don't have the result here, but if you just basically, all these 4 models, if you only train on this task, all of them can Grok. Yeah. So that's basically task frequency go to 1.
Question. So in this particular case, I mean, of course, loss and accuracies are like 2 completely different scales. So what does like do you happen to have like a training accuracy equivalent as well?
I do. So the reason we plotted this like weird interleaf way is because just want to show you it actually generalized, because if you just look at loss, it's very unclear like if it actually generalized or not. Yeah. Accuracy actually capture the behavior part. I do have the plot out in this presentation, probably some other slide deck, but yes, I can find it later. Yeah.
So I have a question. So here the loss here is log likelihood, right?
Yes.
Of the data, right?
Yeah.
My point is, we define this metric, right? The loss, right? We define the accuracy, and then we plot it in, and then we are surprised that something doesn't make sense here, which is the Grokking, right? But everything could be as simple as simply the loss is not defined in the right way to capture model capability. And I don't know if it's very philosophical, but maybe just like we need to revisit the loss and there is something to be done there.
I think that could happen for some tasks, but I think in general, as we just mentioned, like this double descent phenomena, like occurred in pretty much like a lot of very simple tasks, like very simple loss form. Even if you look at both training loss and like evaluation loss, like if you just look at loss for both, this double descent phenomena exists. So in that sense, like I don't think this is just like a metric illusion.
I'm also curious, like if you were to plot training loss versus eval accuracy, or training, like would you, or not over to just that plot, would you see like a sigmoid classic like emergence curve that reflects the emergence? Because to me, this seems like a really neat experiment that really gives, in language modeling terms, both an explanation of double descent and Grokking as well as emergence, where
that's a good
there's a certain, and that it ties them together. But I would actually love to see, because it's definitely noisy, right? Like your 300M slightly achieves lower loss than your 1B at your second frequency, but then on the highest frequency, there's some noise to it.
Yes, yes, there are definitely noise to it.
But if you did enough seeds, there would be an interesting plot.
Each one is like I don't know, a bunch of H200 to bird.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Were these also? Is this one epoch training, or is there repetition?
This is one.
Okay, and how many?
And we trained for 50K steps, so not even that crazy. But then that's already like let me see. Yeah, something like that.
But one other thing I was thinking is you have only 10,000 demonstrations, right, in total?
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
that many.
It's not that many, yes.
it's
Sorry, wait. Well, I say one epoch. I mean one epoch over the pre-training, like the 50K data.
But you might be
obviously,
repeating this
yes,
because
it's
it's still
multi-epoch over the task data. But that's actually how grokking happens. Like you
Mhm.
basically need to repeat over it like 1,000 times.
Do you have a slide for the training accuracy?
Training accuracy, yes. Let me try to find it. I think training accuracy are pretty much all close to.
Train loss?
Yeah, let me try to find it. Yeah, so one of the decision we made when we like write a paper and choose how to represent it, and they were like, yeah, let's just do this weird combo so that people could clearly see. It's the task has been learned. Let me see what happened in my slides.
It's fine if it was like it is not close. You can maybe at the end you can find it.
I think maybe so. This is a slightly different model run. We had a bunch of them, but you can see like similar things. So the top row is accuracy, and the bottom row is loss.
And one means training on just that. The top row means training on just modularization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I think these are the model that didn't train till the. Are they the same? Some of the model might not be like fully finished because this is the plot we did earlier.
so it's almost perfect train accuracy.
The frequency one is infinite compute regime. Like the model has access to all 10K pairs of.
Sorry, what?
You define a task by sampling from the 100 token.
Yeah, we define a task because as Pradesh said, the task only has like 10K instances in total. I think we hold out probably like maybe 20% of it, maybe even more. So those are model never seen it. That's like where we got the test loss and test accuracy. The training ones, yes, we just randomly draw from that sample. And it's been repeated, obviously, because it has to be.
Okay, we are 19 minutes. We have 19 minutes left. Are you like?
Okay, I can get it.
Okay.
I mean, these are great discussions. Okay, let's move on. So I also want to point out that similar to what we have from the synthetic experiment, we kind of show that these tasks are also learned in the order of frequency. This plot, it's not super obvious. The next plot is very obvious. We're actually plot out the task loss against the training step. And we can see the color encoded the frequency. And the two dotted line are our best attempt to try to get an estimation of like task frequency in the pre-training data. So similar tasks, but not the one we actually use. And we roughly see this trend of earlier tasks, more frequent tasks get learned first, and then model move on to the later, less frequent tasks. Okay, so this basically concludes our part one, which we're asking the question like, what is in that gap between a larger model and a smaller model? And the answer is, well, it turns out that by using larger model, the scaling basically enables learning rare and more complex tasks. So I didn't talk too much about complex, but think through that question. It's in the paper, so we did try like varying complexity as well. And again, we see this nice results that our synthetic setting matches pretty well with our pre-training set. Okay, so that brings us to the second question, right? What magic does scaling give us? Like, why these larger model are able to learn more? So to answer this question, we're actually going to revisit something from the memorization literature, and that's where like me and Active's collaboration like starts. Because when you show me this actually reminds me something from memorization. So the one kind of experiment we like to do in memorization literature or measuring memorization is we basically, let's say we inject the sequence into the model at training step 0 or not training step, some step. And then we want to see like, how does the loss of inject sequence change? There are a bunch of papers did that, including one of my earlier papers. And here is what it looks like. It's actually way more complicated than you think. In the sense there are at least 2 stages going on. So here, this is using OMO2 models. So we basically injected a sequence at this step 0. This is not actually training step 0. I think this is like either training step like 50K or like 143K, or sorry, not 143, missing a 0. But basically it's like, that's where we start the injection. And we want to see how the loss of the sequence change. So not surprisingly, when you first inject in this sequence, you're going to see a huge drop in the loss. And in particular, we notice that larger model basically has a larger drop. And what's more interesting is, as this training going on, without seeing this sequence ever again, we see the loss of this sequence go up. That's what we expected. But what's interesting is it go up extremely slowly. To the extent that we have about 400 steps. After 400 steps, it turns out the model still knows something about the sequence in the sense that the loss is still not back to 0 yet. So if you're one of those privacy people, that basically means, at least in this whole window, you can run membership inference attack perfectly fine. And you can tell the model actually trained on this data and you still have evidence of it. Okay, so how this like kind of memorization dynamics is related to what we see from before. Let's bring back.
What's the difference between the 2, orange and yellow versus light blue and dark blue?
So there are like 4 different starting points. The color encoded the model size. So the blue are 1B, the orange are 7B. And then the tint of the color, I think, encoded like the starting point of the checkpoint. So the lighter one are the earlier checkpoints, and the darker one are the later checkpoints. This is from my previous work that also trying to show that later model actually memorize more. So we do see like later model actually retain the information better.
I guess also like in sync with the papers that show that later models become less prone to changing.
Yes,
So
that's
in
also
that
true.
it's also learning faster, but also losing faster.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All those things definitely come together. Yeah. Okay, so how is this curve, related to what we're seeing here? So let's imagine we have a smaller model where, let's say, the retention, wherever the memorization curve look like this. So what this means is, let's say we have a relatively, larger n gap between 2 occurrence of the instance. Before the model even see the second instance, it pretty much forget the first instance, right? The loss pretty much go back to the beginning. Versus if we have a larger model, we're going to see a very different, behavior. So by the time models see the second instance at t equal n, the information about the first instance is still there, at least to some extent. And that potentially gives model the ability to learn some interaction between these 2 instances, such that that allow it to recover a more global structure of the task. So this is the intuition we have here, which basically larger model, because they memorize more and they retain the task signal better, that actually help them to learn a real task. Okay, so is that the case? Again, we bring back our synthetic setting and we inject the sequence at a relatively low frequency, or not sequence, sorry, inject the linear regression task. And we vary, the model size. And this gives exactly what we predict from the previous slide. Basically, as you increase this with n, the real task signal decays rapidly in the smaller models, but then remains stable in the wider models. So we see the first one, basically the moment, it stops seeing it, it just immediately drops to bottom. And overall, it doesn't actually capture much signal about the task. Versus on the right, we see the signal actually doesn't drop that much and it accumulated gradually.
What determines the signal here in this situation?
That's a great question. I kind of try to gloss over it. You can check paper for detail because this is a synthetic setting. You can precisely basically measure like how much about this task, because it's direction, right? Each task is basically a set of feature direction. You can check how much that feature direction still exists in your model weights. Yeah. That's the signal.
So it's not lost, right?
It's not exactly lost. Yeah. In the real model, it's lost. So we just directly measure the task loss, and we can do similar things. We can fix a frequency, and we can vary model size. And again, we can see larger model basically have the ability to accumulate the task signal across different injection steps. Okay. And then we could go even deeper. These are still like on the behavioral level. I kind of show you how the loss get affected by this retention effects. But if you think about it, like where does loss even come from, right? Everything is gradients. So let's go deeper into gradient.
Can I just go back to the
Okay, great.
So the loss is on eval. No, the next one. The loss is eval loss.
Yeah.
But the injection is the training exam.
Yes, yes.
So it has like such a big spike on the eval exam too also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very
this is I think this is another this is a different task. It's not a modular addition task. This task actually has a nice property of like training and evaluation actually correlates very well.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the other one you can see similar things.
And is it like, why do we even see the spike?
Why do we even see the spikes? The spikes are where the task instance are presented in the training data. So basically, it's like when model get a task signal. Yeah. Okay. So here we have a nice tiny model. So two tasks competing over a neuron to give you a sense of like what could happening, like at a very low level. Like play it again. So on the top, we basically see we have two different tasks. So obviously the two tasks are orthogonal as we defined before. And then we have this one neuron whose current value or direction is represented by that black arrow. And we can see as the learning happens, on the top one, on the top row, we see the neuron direction basically got pulled over towards the frequent task direction. Versus in the bottom row, if we have two neurons, we'll see that the model learned the frequent task first, and then it moved on to the least frequent task. Let me just play it. And you can sense a competition over that direction of the neuron. And that competition, which I have a static version here, was basically drive by these updates, right? And what updates really mean is just like how gradient computed over the batch.
Just to make sure I understand the picture, there will be more competition if the model is small, right? More competition over a neuron if the model is small compared to larger models, right?
There will be more competition over the neuron if you have, let's say, more tasks or you have less neurons. That's like
if you have less neurons, which is a small model, which is, it makes sense, which is the capacity of the model.
Yes.
I have a question. I don't remember that proving literature off the top of my head, but would you then expect from this result that pruning should preferentially degrade performance on like in order of frequent task rarity? So as you prune, you should get worse at the rare tasks first because they are either like they're basically less redundant across the population, so there's less redundancy. I feel like this should manifest in some like representational measure and be visible through some sort of.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. Would that also depend on like the pruning method?
I'm sure it would, and I think one thing that I feel like would make it a little bit challenging is that most pruning is in neuron space, and like the task representation is probably not necessarily neuron aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suspect maybe if you pruned in activation space based on, you could probably prune in activation space in a way that would, essentially order it by task rarity. I would think.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. Like,
because the thing to think is like, pruning, like works surprisingly well. It's shocking when you number of neurons intact to still get, similar performance as an intact model. But like, maybe the way in which people are measuring that is perhaps overly enforced or like, it's using something.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's like, could open up a lot of directions to look at.
I'm not going to ask you to run an experiment.
Well, it's also cheaper than actually burning a few H200s on training the model.
Yeah, that is true.
The pruning side is like definitely the cheaper way to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect like quantization might have something similar.
That's a really good thought. That you should see like degradation.
Right.
Rarity as you quantize to lower resolution.
Right.
I mean, there's also an argument from Grokking, right? That once you do learn the simpler solution, you don't need as many parameters, right? So to get to that simpler solution, you have to interpolate
It's like
everything.
the lottery
And then once
ticket.
you've interpolated everything, now you're able to find the parameters that are far from your original parameters. Find it.
Nicely.
And then you don't need all of them again. You can sort of, because pruned models tend to not post-train well, right?
That's why you can distill a student from a teacher, because they can directly teach you what they've learned.
If that's the case, then if you like mess with like the data ordering during training, if you're saying like this is really rare, so it keeps forgetting before the next example. If you like cluster them together, would it learn first and then like maintain that longer? Or?
I don't know. That's another. So that would definitely affect it. But then it's like, does that help it retain longer once it learned? We don't know.
Right.
Yeah, but it will definitely like change the way things get learned. Yeah. Related to that thought, just like, it's possible there's certain feature in the, like, if you believe in those like curriculum learning, there might be certain feature that's very critical that you want to learn early on. So for those feature, maybe it does make sense that you force the example related to that feature like early, such that Val can learn it, and then that will allow it to learn other features.
Yeah, but I feel like I haven't seen enough positive results from it.
Do you believe in curriculum?
Okay, I regret mentioning it.
I have faith.
You should have more faith after this, I think. Okay. Okay, I'll just quickly go over it since we only have like 5 minutes left. So, can we like nicely build on this intuition and actually check what's going on in our synthetic setting and our pre-training setting? Answer is yes. So here this is for the synthetic setting. We look at the cosine similarity of the gradient between a batch of Fourier tasks and frequent tasks. And we see, yes, they're in fact fighting for, these directions. So every time you see a darker spot, this is where like these two directions basically has very high cosine similarity, meaning they're basically kicking each other out. And that nicely corresponds to like all the dip that you see in the previous plots. And, as we get a lighter model, these kind of gradient interference basically disappeared. So this experiment is like relatively clean in the synthetic setting. So in the real setting, this is like actually get exciting. So in order to analyze for the real setting, we first need to find a task feature, which you can go to look at a paper and see how we did it. Basically use some interpretability tool to actually localize feature that matters. And after that, we really need to define like, what is our task direction? Like what is like everything that's in the synthetic setting where we can get by just doing math. So here we define the task direction basically by using all training instance of the task, may or may not be in this particular batch, and we just compute a global gradient direction as our task direction. And within each batch, we have two types of tokens, right? We have like token that contributes to the task and token that does not. And we further compute it to gradient direction. That's the batch task gradient and the batch non-task gradient. And they together get us this batch gradient. Okay, so what we're going to show is we can in fact find out that there is very large interference in the smaller model, but pretty much no interference in the larger model. So the first one is just the cosine similarity between the batch gradient and the task reference, which is not very clear to us. Like if you have a larger value, what it means, because that could either mean the collision or it means like, these two things actually aligned. But once we decompose the batch gradient into the batch task gradient and batch non-task gradient, which is the middle row and the bottom row, things get much clearer. So we see for the task gradients, obviously we only see them like every n batch where we inject the task. And we can actually see the yellow one is like slightly higher than the purple one. So the purple one is the smallest model, yellow one is the largest model. There's a gap, but it's like, there's this big. So what's more interesting is we look at the cosine similarity between the non-task token gradient and task reference. This is where things get exciting. And you can see the purple line obviously just like oscillating up and down, like very extremely compared to the other two. The other two are more close to zero. So this is exactly the signal of interference. So having a large cosine similarity either direction basically means some non-task gradient is exactly in the direction or opposite direction of your task, and basically kick the task information out. And this again, matches with our synthetic setting. And overall, we can say that scaling basically helps reduce this gradient interference and also allow better task retention. Okay, so just takeaways. I think this paper really just presents a learning mechanism, and it says like scaling enable learning via reduced interference and better retention. And we talk about two parts of this. The first is like, what is the gap between the loss of a larger model and smaller model, right? So we say that larger model actually learn tasks in the tail of the data distribution. And we go even deeper and see like what's the mechanism. So this attribute goes to retention, and very deep level, I guess, is really just gradient interference between tasks.